everyone. This is Kathy Mason from Mason Works Marketing here on Conscious Business Zone with my new friend, Judi Miller. Hi, Judy. How are you?
I'm doing great, Kathy. How are you?
Good, good. Well, Judy, I am so excited to introduce you to everyone today because I think your book and your work are so perfect to help us get through these chaotic times that we're in, these changing times, because the work that you've done on forgiveness and self improvement, on focusing on love and happiness is a path that everyone can choose now. So welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you. And I love the word that you used. Perfect.
That's right. So Judy, you just wrote a book, and I just love it, called Perfect. And some of my cronies or friends, or I don't know what you're. I'm a student of some of them. All praised your book. So you are friends with Deb Poneman and Marcy Smirnoff, and who else was in there that I knew? Dr. Sue Mortar. And so I've taken classes from a lot of these people or met them in person or helped promote their work. So they all gave your book, Perfect, a wonderful accolades. Do you want to talk a little bit about your journey? I mean, obviously, to write a book and call it perfect.
Yes. It's an interesting title because I get so many mixed reactions from people. But Kathy, I'd love to ask you a question.
Uh,
Have you ever been afraid?
of course, of course. I think everyone has, and sometimes it's visceral and sometimes it's mental.
Yeah, I love what you said. And the reason I ask you that question is because as I look back on my life, I realize that most of my life was lived from a state of fear. So I actually moved to the United States. I was born in Trinidad. I moved to the United States when I was very, very young, and I never felt like I fit in. I didn't look like other kids in the neighborhood, and this is not about race or discrimination. I
Right.
just didn't feel like I fit in. I was also born with 11 fingers, and I could sense and feel different energies at night. And I was never really sure if they were there to help me or to harm me. So that's how I started my life with these fears. And literally, night after night, I would crawl into bed, I would pull the covers over my head, and I would pray for these energies to go away. So then, fast forward, I actually started my career as a CPA, a very traditional lifestyle. And then I went to work in the healthcare industry for about 25 years as a finance director. So my life was very traditional. But at night, I had these uncontrollable fears and anxieties that I couldn't understand. So that's just a little bit about my background and how I started.
Well, I think the reason I'm excited about this is I'm hearing stories like yours a lot. I am hearing because I work with a lot of amazing healers, and there's a lot of women, particularly women, that are highly effective in the world. They've got the job, the nice car, the great family. They've got, from the outside, it looks like they've got it all together, but their soul is waking up, and they're waking up to be a greater version than all of that exterior, but it's inside work. And people are like popping, but they don't have a roadmap. We're used to, on this exterior world, to have, well, you go to college, get married, have kids, be, you've got your whole, oh, get a PhD if I should, write a book, all of those themes that good girls or girls that want love from the outside do. And then all of a sudden you realize that was a lie.
Mm. Yes, you're absolutely correct because I did have that traditional lifestyle, working and, moving up the corporate ladder and then getting to a point where what's next for my life. But one of the things that I learned on this journey was because I felt different, because I felt incomplete, because I felt like I wasn't enough, there was a point in my life where, Kathy, I felt like I was nothing. But what I discovered on the journey was in that state of nothingness, I could be anything that I wanted. So what I mean by that is when we drop our stories, our labels, and our judgments, we could create anything that we want.
Isn't that fabulous? So tell us some more about your your journey from this awakening, because I think that so many people will really relate to it that are we're in a time of transition, and there's so much need to go in
Mhm.
because we're projecting everything out.
Absolutely. And, I mentioned that I had these fears as a child,
Yeah.
and it continued well into my 20s. But then I met my husband. He's also a CPA,
Uh-huh.
and we had 2 incredible kids. And in the exhaustion of raising our children, everything stopped. So the energies, the subtle whispers, the visions, the fears
Oh,
absolutely stopped. But then my kids grew up and then they went off to college. And, if you have any empty nesters as listeners, the house became incredibly silent.
right.
And Kathy, in that silence, everything returned. The whispers, the energies, the fear, they all returned. And I would literally tiptoe around my house, afraid of who or what I might encounter.
Wow.
And it got to such a point where I was losing sleep, my husband was losing sleep. And at the same time, I was starting to bleed uncontrollably month after month. And my doctor said that I needed to get a hysterectomy or I could potentially bleed to death.
Wow.
So, Kathy, any normal person working in the healthcare industry, I went on Google and Googled healers near me. So that was my answer to the cure. And it's interesting. I met this healer, and it was right before my surgery, and I wasn't expecting to heal from what was ailing me. I just wanted to go into the surgery calm, and I wanted to be able to recuperate and heal quite easily. But I continued to work with my healer for 9 months after that. And Kathy, we started to explore this irrational fear that I had at night, this fear of being hurt, this trauma that I felt. And we looked at my parents, we looked at my childhood experiences, but nothing came to light. So my healer introduced me to past lives. And I'll be honest with you, coming from a traditional CPA finance background, past lives was nothing that I'd ever heard of before. But it was interesting. One of the people she introduced me to was Dr. Brian Weiss, and he had a patient named Catherine, and Catherine had these unexplainable fears and phobias similar to I did. And quite by accident, during a hypnosis, he was actually able to take her back into different past lives. And her understanding where the trauma came from, Kathy, she was actually able to be healed. And
Yeah.
I never heard of anything like this. And then it's quite amazing. You're shaking your head.
Well, yes, well, it makes total sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the other things that I got introduced to is the whole science of epigenetics.
Mhm.
And what I learned was that not only do we inherit the color of our hair, the color of our skin, the shape of our nose from our parents, but we could actually inherit the trauma from our parents and our ancestors.
Yep.
And they've shown, you're shaking your head, they've shown that with Holocaust survivors, that the trauma that they experienced could actually be experienced or triggered in their offspring and in their grandchildren.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and they've done experiments with mice, just the scent of cherry blossoms, and then they would gently zap the mice on the feet. And what I found interesting was that the mice's children and their grandchildren also, just the scent of cherry blossoms would trigger the same fear,
Yeah.
even though they had never been zapped.
Right.
So what we uncovered was that fear and that trauma that I felt every night was actually just the cellular memory of the trauma that my mother had gone through, and I had never even known. But
Wow.
Kathy, my story doesn't end there. And I know that you aren't quite finished with the book, but there's a shocking ending. And then the reason why the ending is so important was because during one of our sessions, I had learned and discovered that the very healer that I trusted to heal me in this lifetime actually had a past life connection to my family. And she was actually the soul that inflicted the pain on my family. And
Oh,
your mouth is open because I know it sounds a little strange and a little unusual.
no, no, it's everything's in divine order. And I believe that before we embodied, we chose this whole play, and it can go to the left or the right a little bit. Like if there's a Y in the road, You can go to the left or the right, but eventually you're going to come back to what your lesson or your choice or your adventure, however you want to frame it.
Mhm.
But that we embodied with that, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the reasons why I resonate so much with you. But, you know, in that moment of revelation when I discovered that connection to that soul,
Uh-huh.
I could have felt fear, I could have felt anger, I could have felt betrayal, but I didn't. What I felt was the ultimate love and perfection of the universe. I saw how all of our souls are actually interconnected, and we are given the opportunity to come back and heal
Yeah.
what we might have chosen to do differently.
Yes, yes. So Dr. Sue Morter, when I took her class, and I have like 4 of her DVDs of teaching how to do the shade, have you done any of her work?
Yes, I'm actually a certified facilitator
Oh,
and coach
oh,
for Dr.
cool.
Sue.
Okay, okay. Well,
So
anyway,
I love Dr. Sue.
me too. What a delightful personality. But anyway, she talks about how before we come into physical, that it's like we're all at a bus stop, and you as your unembodied soul say, hey, I want to do this time. Will you be the person that does this to me? And will you marry me? And will you be my child? And have you heard her say that?
I love her bus stop conversation. Yes, absolutely. Now, Kathy, have you heard of Neil Donald Walsh's book, Little Soul in the Sun?
Yeah, yeah. I did the marketing plan for for humanities team,
Oh, wow,
so
fantastic.
I know him pretty well. Yeah.
Is it okay if I just summarize the book really quickly
Sure,
for your
sure,
audience?
sure.
Only because I think it's just another way of explaining the bus stop conversation so beautifully. So in heaven, everything is perfect, and
Yes,
we cannot experience our perfection because there's no contrast. It's in the contrast that creates the clarity.
yes,
So in heaven, this little soul wants to experience forgiveness, but there's absolutely nothing to forgive. So he asks the other souls and the other angels to help him, and nobody wants to volunteer. Nobody wants to do the unthinkable. And he's very sad. But eventually, this angel of light comes forward and says, I will help you. I will do something so atrocious that you will have to learn forgiveness and unconditional love. But please remember that when we come to earth to act out, our divine assignments, please remember because I'll be practicing so hard that I may have forgotten. And the reason I love this story was because remember those people that trigger us are probably here to serve us. They were the ones that raised their hand when nobody else would, because nobody else wanted to do the unthinkable to help you learn your lessons. So that next time that you meet somebody that triggers you, maybe you'll have a different perspective on why they're here and why they're in your life.
that's so perfect. The idea of being triggered, I think everyone right now, even people that are highly evolved, are being triggered. They're being tested.
Mhm.
Walk as the eye in the storm among all this chaos, where the polarity of thoughts and actions and and people being vocal about things that they used to not talk about is difficult. It's very difficult. So the idea of knowing that everything is imperfection, this was all a divine assignment, divine order. I like using those words. Those are my ways of looking at it. But that forgiveness is forgiveness also of yourself, and you're out of alignment. The triggers are a gift.
Mhm. And I love what you say. So I know that you're a fan of Dr. Seuss. So she doesn't, when something triggers you, don't say why, ask where. So where in your body do you feel it?
Right,
Because it gets lodged. Our traumas get lodged in our bodies, issues in our tissues. And, exactly what you were saying. So whenever I feel a contraction in my body, I say thank you. I say thank you because it's my body's infinite intelligence telling me that there's an opportunity to heal and release something.
right, right.
So you were talking about everything that's happening in the world and how a lot of people are getting triggered and there's a lot of contraction. So on a larger scale, that contraction, it's an opportunity. It's the world telling us that it's now an opportunity to heal.
Perfect. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Hmm.
And to choose that. That's why this is conscious business zone, is that I'm honored to feature people that afford a different perspective of how to live life, where you can make better choices for yourself and your family and your life. Anyone in your sphere benefits from your clearing any obscurations to being love.
Yeah, that's beautifully said.
Yes,
So, Kathy, one of the amazing things that I learned is that soul that inflicted the pain on my family was given an opportunity to come back and heal.
right.
And what I learned is that we can truly never get it wrong. There's actually nothing to prove. We can truly never get it wrong because we could always come back and heal. We could heal in any moment. It's a choice.
That's so perfect. That's so perfect. Well, when you went from your CPA um, binary debit and credit,
I
sorry,
love it.
but I ran a division of Arthur Anderson of the Change Enablement Group. So we were consultants, but and doing online learning and training, but in HR. But we worked with the accountants, and I mean it's binary. I mean that thought process. It's right or wrong, left or right, debit or credit. It is. It doesn't really allow for what your personal development. That must have been a huge shock, the perspective of life in a different way.
I started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and that's where I
Okay,
met my husband. That's where I met my husband. But just to give you a perspective on this binary mind of mine, my both of my parents are accountants. My sister is an accountant, and when I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, my husband, my sister-in-law, and me all work there, and my daughter is also a CPA at PricewaterhouseCoopers.
oh wow.
But what I found is that we take ourselves wherever we go. So when I had this awakening and when I came to these understandings and these truths, I found that the way that I showed up at work in corporate America was very different. I no longer had to struggle to prove myself. I no longer, I already knew that I was. I knew that I was worthwhile. I knew that all of us have something to contribute. And when you let go of the need to continuously prove yourself and know that you're worthy, life becomes so much easier. You no longer need to struggle. And what I found was that coming from that state of grace, my job became easier. I actually was able to achieve more because people wanted to work with me.
Right.
People wanted to support me, and we were all supporting each other for the greatest good. And it was truly beautiful.
Well, I find that the release of the need to hold on to I call it an outfit, like a uniform. What um, when this was over 20 years ago that I worked with Arthur Anderson, and it seemed as though I was highly psychic and intuitive, but I was undercover. So I'd have my business suit on and the whole thing, but the energy that it took to put on that persona, to wear that outfit,
Mhm.
the uniform or whatever you want to call it, but it created this boundary that was the only way I could maintain the facade of being normal. and 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 then after, as soon as you get rid of the need to have that, and be the authentic person that you are and love yourself enough, not be afraid of being rejected for who you are, all this creative energy,
Mhm.
is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And Kathy, to that point, can I share another story with
Yes,
you?
please. Yes, please.
So in my book, Perfect, I recount some of these experiences that I went through, and a lot of them sound like near-death experiences. I was always fascinated with near-death experiences, but I was literally dying with my eyes wide open.
Yep.
So after I had my surgery, I would lay in bed very still. I refused to take painkillers just because I heard so many traumatic, stories about people becoming addicted. So I would lay in bed and try not to move. Any sneeze, any laughter would literally feel like an electric shock through my abdomen. So I would lay in bed, and as I was laying in bed recuperating, this gentle presence just drifted into my awareness. And I know it sounds unusual, but it felt like an Irish guide. And she would sit beside me for hours, just making sure that I was okay. And one of the things that she told me in one of these moments was, if we knew who stood beside us, we would never be afraid. And Kathy, if we knew who stood beside us, we would never be afraid. Would we live our lives differently?
Hmm. Yes. Yes. I believe that anxiety and fear is the roadblock to living a joyful life. And I think that it's generational. I know my mother, when she would get upset, I'm number 4 out of 5, and she would get colitis.
Mhm.
So it was definitely a body reaction. And it's like, oh, I'd start to cry, and she'd go to the bathroom.
Mhm.
So I mean, yeah, who knows where that came from in her lineage?
Right, absolutely. And, we were talking about the science of epigenetics, but scientists believe that all female babies are born with 2 to 3 million eggs
Right,
when they're born, and we don't reproduce anymore. But on a cellular level, when your mother was younger, you were actually in there as an unborn egg. So the triumphs, the traumas that she experienced, you actually experienced energetically.
right,
And
right,
there was an amazing drawing that I saw recently. It was a picture of a pregnant grandmother, and inside the pregnant grandmother was the mother, and inside of the mother was the 2 to 3 million, unborn eggs. And so when your grandmother was alive, you were also in there cellularly experiencing many of the things that she did. So it's not unusual to expect that, yes, we are energetically pick up some of those things from our ancestors.
Well, I think that is actually, you picked them for you. Your soul essence picked your family to have. I mean, just think of how how quantum. Well, from doing computer work and accounting, picture what program is running, that you could actually pick your parents and have picked your husband, your parents, your kids, this whole scenario out when you were out of form. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
just
And what's beautiful is, some indigenous cultures believe that when we heal 7 generations
yes,
back and 7 generations forward. So when we were at this bus stop conversation, perhaps it's our opportunity now to heal our families and our generations.
of course. I believe that the reason there's so many beings on the planet right now, over 7 billion people, is that this is the opportunity of the galaxy right
Mhm.
now to be part of this shift. And I think it's one of the first times, and this just a thing I came up with. I don't know where I got it. Is that we're ascending embodied, which means that the more of our light, more of our soul light can actually embody this vessel. Because if you look at historically, you look at the religious scriptures, all the mystics, that it was always a yearning to get out of this vessel. But this time period is very special right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if believe in numerology, but 2021 is the year of 5, so that means there's a lot of movement, and that movement can support us, meaning that our intentions and what we want can. can occur or manifest much more quickly, but it also means that if we're not fully grounded, we could also be blindsided. So there's definitely an opportunity to manifest more of what we want this year.
Right. So for your work now, because you've changed your whole paradigm, how did you navigate that? I started to ask about your change when you started to heal all this past trauma, sleep better, fall in love with yourself again.
Mhm.
How could you explain that so that others might understand how they could benefit from reading your book or from knowing more about working with you?
Sure. So I guess there's really two avenues. The first one is, the subtitle to the book is A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation. So forgiveness is a huge part of it. And, there's so many different definitions of forgiveness. But for me, Kathy, it's very simple. It means to forgo or to let go of. And painful and traumatic events are going to happen to all of us. We
Right,
can either experience that event once, or we could literally play it over and over again, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times until it becomes our identities and it becomes stuck.
right,
So for me, forgiveness is just letting go of those contracted energies so we can move forward and experience more freedom, more joy, more happiness in our lives. So forgiveness is one part of what I teach people. And then the other part is the ancestral part. So I've studied with John Newton, and like we said, there's a lot of trauma that we can inherit in our bodies, and we don't even have to know where it came from. We just need to know where in our bodies. And I go through an exercise with people that we breathe gently into the area because our body is a infinitely intelligent blueprint.
that's
And I don't know if you've ever studied the work of Louise Hay, but she says certain traumas literally get lodged in specific places. So if we have an issue in our leg or our knee, it could be that we don't feel like we could move forward in life. So it's interesting. So we go through this process of breathing into the area, and oftentimes an image or memory might come to you, and it may not make any sense whatsoever, right? But
right.
in that moment, you might be saying something to yourself. So in my experience, I was saying, "Why are you here?" But for each of us, it's different, and it sounds a little strange, but energetically, it's the same thing that describes the trauma in your body. So we go through this forgiveness prayer and recipe to release that trauma. So that's the ancestral piece. So there's a part about forgiveness and letting go of the stories, and the other component is the ancestral part that we may not know about.
So, do you feel that there is a truth about us living all of our lives all at the same time, all of our past lives? Have what?
Yes, so I think what you're saying is, the way that I'm interpreting is that, there really is no time. Time is a man-made thing, that
Right.
everything is literally happening simultaneously.
Well, the question is that the forgiveness that we're talking about generations. We're talking about. I do Akashic records readings and use that as a way to connect with the divine and for my clients. And so I don't. I find these concepts really hard to get my mind around because I understand healing and doing the forgiveness in this lifetime can affect my daughter, her daughter, that generation. But and the healing would come from past. But the idea that I've I'm having multiple lifetimes with multiple families, with multiple decisions, that gets quantum.
Absolutely, and good thing we don't have to keep track of all of that.
Well, I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
So, I've gone through several past life regressions, and they've all been extremely interesting. But what I found is that when I can go back and actually heal something, it does impact everything that comes after that. Because some people do believe that everything is happening simultaneously, and that's how we're able to actually heal.
Right, right. Well, if we're doing everything simultaneously, then I think that there are infinite. possibilities and choices.
Mhm.
Just like I said, there's a Y, and even if you take the left and you're supposed to take the right, you'll still get to wherever you're supposed to go.
Mhm.
I do think that we're divine. It's a beautiful, perfect scenario.
Yeah, and I do believe that we have multiple different versions of ourselves, different outcomes of based on our choices, etcetera. Um, it's like you said, it's a lot to get our minds around.
So for you right now, do you feel that there's a generation of people that your message is for? Do you feel that it's um, I mean, it seems as though the really young children coming in, they're awake.
Mhm.
They're full of joy. They didn't get the fear memo, or they didn't get as bad as we did. Um, do you feel that your work is designed to help a certain age group, or
Absolutely, absolutely. So, just to comment on what you said before, I believe there's only 2 true emotions, and everything falls into it. One is absolutely love, and we are love, and the second one is fear, and fear is just a contracted energy wishing that we can change the past or worried or afraid of the future.
right?
Right. So my message is really geared towards people who have lived a life of fear, who they feel that they're different, incomplete, and unworthy, because I know that we're not. And I tried to show people that because one of the things that I realized is that when we let go of the labels, the stories, and the judgments, we could experience everything through the eyes of love, where there is no separation. And it's exactly what you said, Kathy. So, have you ever noticed young children? They're so amazed at everything. Everything is new and everything is perfect, right?
Yeah,
So, when we drop our stories, labels, and judgments, we experience each moment as if it's the very first time because we're not bringing our baggage and our stories and everything with it. We're experiencing that moment truly as if it was the very first time. And when you experience and live life that way, life truly becomes miraculous, just like the children experience.
right, right. So how do you feel you can identify when it's excitement versus fear? So
Oh, love that, love that. So, before I came on this show with
yeah,
you, I could have felt a dryness in my throat, my heart could have been fluttering, my stomach could have been tight, and I could have labeled those sensations as excitement.
right,
But Kathy, those are the same exact sensations I feel when I'm nervous. It's me who decides the labels that I put on the sensations that I'm experiencing. So, one of my favorite books was Dr. Stephen Covey's book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective
me
People. It
too.
was one of my favorite books. But in it, as you remember, he talks about between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap, we get to decide.
Right,
We get to decide how we respond. Do we respond from a state of love? Do we respond from a place of fear? So we're the ones choosing the stories that we create about life.
right, right. And what I find is that people are getting out of their stories now. That's why I was so excited to have you on, because I think that this whole shutdown period where people had the fear of death, they had to at least identify what their fear of death was, because it was an invisible enemy that could you could die from last March, or how long ago was it now?
It seems like a very long time ago.
Yeah, when I get off my dinosaur. Anyway, the thing is that I think that people are starting to decide at a different level, because they can hear, for instance, you'll have a girlfriend and you'll have the same kind of critical conversation or
Mhm.
sympathetic conversation. And then you just, at a certain point, go, that doesn't serve either one of us. I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Did you find that? Did you find that you expanded? I mean, how do you deal with people's story?
So, two things I just want to mention to you related to your question. The first one is Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor wrote a book, My Stroke of Insight,
Right,
and you're nodding your head. She was able to heal herself from traumatic brain injury.
right,
But what I loved about her book was the 90-second rule. She said, when an event happens, it literally only takes us 90 seconds to process that event through our physiology and then let it go. After those 90 seconds are up, it's up to us. So if it continues for more than 90 seconds, we're starting to create that story.
right.
So to your question, how do I deal with people or how do I help people with their stories? I use an acronym called NEST, NEST, like a bird's nest.
Uh-huh.
And the N stands for to notice. So we have 60,000 thoughts a day, 95% of the same ones we had yesterday, and 80% of them are quite negative, right? Many of us live on autopilot,
Right,
right? So the first, in that gap that we talked about, Dr. Stephen Covey talked about,
yeah,
in that gap,
yeah,
become aware of your thoughts. No longer live on autopilot. So it's become aware. The E is to truly experience the sensations in our bodies and then let them go, right? To
right,
take those 90 seconds and truly feel it, because many of us actually don't feel our emotions or the sensations in our bodies. We think about it, we don't actually feel it.
right.
The S, and I'm going through these extremely quickly. The S is to scratch the record. And some of them you've heard cancel, cancel, zap your hand on the wrist. But the one that I learned from Tony Robbins was zany, crazy thing. Do something so zany and crazy to disrupt the story that you can't repeat the story, or you may have forgotten what the story was. So for me and my husband, when we get into an argument, we agreed in advance that one of us will reach over and grab the other one by the nose. Okay. Okay, so Kathy's laughing. So that's what we do. We end up laughing that we actually forget what we were arguing about, or
Perfect.
or we no longer get in that cycle that we have to prove ourselves. So that's scratch your record. And then T is tender loving care. So many of us feel isolated and alone, not because of COVID. We feel isolated and alone because we've disconnected from the divine, but we've also disconnected from the essence of who we are. How many people do you know that have abandoned themselves emotionally, physically, spiritually?
Right, right.
So now is the opportunity for that tender loving care. So it's a process that I go through with clients.
That is so perfect. I did the whole course of Avatar, which is a course by Harry Palmer. And one of the things they had was as a tool, it was called creation handling procedure. And basically, a lot of the work was the first part of the work is all about feelings that we're so numb. They have a full day of stuff called feel its um,
Mhm.
because if you can't heal it if you can't feel it, and we are shut down. We are in denial, I guess, is or in role. I think a lot of it's role playing. I really do that
Mhm.
that we don't allow ourselves the love that we give to everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And those pains that we feel in our body is just trapped energy. So I love what you were saying about, feeling our emotions.
Yes, yes. Well, the avatar thing, what they do is you feel the extreme unwanted, usually unwanted emotion, and then you do the total opposite. So it's like a yin yang,
Mhm.
and then you keep expanding it until it's 20 feet wide, and you step, you're in it, and you step out of it and you say, this is not I, this is my creation. I will
Mhm.
create. And I used to just kick it away like a
Oh, wow.
like a beach ball. But what happens is it allows you to feel and process both feelings,
Mhm.
enough to realize that you didn't need either one of them, and then you're at the middle in peace, and so you step out.
Wow. I love that. I love that. And what it makes me think of is, sometimes we're in the midst of it. It's very difficult to see that blessing in the situation.
Right.
But, once we take that 1,000-foot view, what if we stepped back and viewed life as a project? What if everything that was happening in our lives was just a project for us to learn and to grow? Then we don't take things so personally and we can have that different perspective.
I think also the idea that we're an everlasting being, and that you're not alone, that everything is um, flowing in perfection with love. That
Mhm.
is once you realize that you're not alone, that everything changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if it's okay with you, I'd love to share another story from the book.
Please share everything you can. I'm just trying to help.
So my healer recommended that we do a past life regression to see whether, where these traumas and these fears were coming from. And in this particular session, I started to drift slowly up, and I went through this purple haze and then out into this bright white light. And like I mentioned, they do sound like near-death experiences.
Yeah,
I went into this bright white light, and the message that I got was we can all come home. We can all come home by loving and accepting who we are exactly as we are. So, Kathy, that's how we get home, by loving and accepting who we are exactly as we are. And so many of us struggle with self-love. So one of the things that I do teach is mastery of self-love. So it's so important to love ourselves. And, I just have to add this in, is when we judge other people, when we judge ourselves, and like you mentioned early on, sometimes we are the most critical of ourselves. Sometimes the person that we don't forgive is ourselves.
yeah,
But when we judge and label ourselves, we remove ourselves from the divine. We create that separation. And that's why we feel disconnected.
that's beautiful. So when you discovered all of this, did you right away see a difference in all your relationships? Did you right away find a new way of being?
I did. I actually did. Life became easier. I stopped creating the stories, but the one that I saw the most was with my husband. My husband is just and you mentioned this early on, my husband is just a reflection of everything that I hold in myself. So, as I mentioned, I felt different for most of my life. So, of course, I married a man that was totally different than me, racially, spiritually, financially, everything. He was totally different. And his family was very different, from a very different background. And I always felt like I didn't fit in. And I think part of the reason is because I closed my heart. I didn't want to let them in because I was afraid that they would judge me, and I was afraid that they wouldn't love me. So my mother-in-law passed away, and I'm not a medium, but because my heart was just so wide open from all of these experiences, she actually came to visit me. And when she came to visit me, she showed me every single interaction that I had with my husband and his family. Kathy, it went by like a movie. It
Right,
went by in seconds. Like, they talk about in near death experiences. But what I saw in the movie was that because I felt different, I made myself different.
yeah, yeah,
Because what we hold is what we project and what we experience.
that's right. That's right. That's how you're being, right? I mean, you're being because you were being careful and not being authentically you because that felt safer.
Yeah.
But then once you drop the mask, that's why I call it a costume or mask. After that's gone, the liberation of that and the playfulness. I mean, we're supposed to create heaven on earth. We somebody hid the memo. Because the whole thing is how do you co-create on the cutting edge of creation here
Mhm.
in the physical? Well, it's not through fear. It's
Right.
not through fear.
Right, and, I love the work of Byron Katie. It's called The Work,
Yeah,
and she asked 4 simple questions. So you take the things that make you feel contracted, and then you ask, "Is it true? Are you absolutely true?" And then you turn it around, and by doing this, I got to a point where I was actually laughing because of how I reacted, and I was laughing because I truly saw the blessing in the situation. So it's interesting, the stories that we create, and then when we're able to let go of that, we truly see the blessing.
that's and right now what we're seeing in the world is a humanity story. And
Mhm.
so the work that you're doing, where healing people and giving people a perspective of your journey to healing, and forgiveness will really, really help people on their journey, because this is the way. This is what we came here to do, is to turn the ship around and be co-creating as a divine being and take your place as a creator, an extension of source. Of,
Yeah. Yeah, our purpose is to love and to have joy and happiness. But, Gabby, one of the things that I find interesting is that most people don't even spend time every day in something that truly brings them joy.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's our purpose to be here. It's a blessing to be on the planet.
right, right. Well, the victim model is pretty strong until it isn't. And
Mhm.
once you break out of that, well, first of all, you think everyone's watching you, and then you realize they're all watching themselves. They're not watching you, actually. So that creates freedom. But I think the other thing that we want to talk about is that there's so many wonderful tools. You've mentioned some of the tools that you've used. I mentioned one that I used. Um, there's so many tools out there for people that are ready. They're functioning, but they're not in joy. They have loved ones around them, but they're not really enjoying them. Um,
Mhm.
all of those things. Could you speak to that? Because I think that's the gift of your book. That's the gift of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the methods that I talk about in the book, I discovered quite by accident. So I would go to my healer every week and I would lay on the table for about 45 minutes with nothing to do while she worked on me. And Kathy, I would close my eyes and then I would start to imagine people and places that I loved. It could be my husband, my kids, the first time I held them in my hands. It could be a beautiful sunset. And I just started to imagine picture after picture, scenes, people that I loved. And, one of the things that Dr. Sue taught me was, you can multiply that 10 times more and then 10 times more. And I found that I was just vibrating in this state of love that I was creating. And the reason I wanted to mention this to you and your listeners is because I could create that feeling of love in any moment, at any time. And it wasn't dependent on anyone or anything. And it's a powerful, powerful way to get back to that state of love.
Right. It's perfect. It's perfect. And love really is all there is. What the adventure is releasing the layers of the onion that are hiding the love, or
Mhm.
however, unwrapping the present, however you want to put it. But the idea that we can go from this this programming that we're in to a more simple, a more refined, a more generous and it's full of gratitude, love, connection, wonder, excitement,
Mhm.
joy, happiness. I mean, all of those items that we thought we had to die and then we go to heaven to have, we can have them all right here, right now.
Yeah, and I love what you said because all of those have the same high frequency vibration as love. And, you mentioned Deborah Poneman in the beginning, and one of the things that I learned from Deborah was she literally goes around every day, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." She's thanking everything because that state of gratitude brings into her life that vibration of gratitude, so she has more to be grateful for. And one of the things that I teach people is to start where you are.
Perfect.
If even if it's just as simple as I have a house over my roof and I have a job that helps me take care of my family. Start where you are, and the more grateful that you can be, the more things you'll come into your life to be grateful for.
Right, right. The other thing that people do is laughter yoga. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, there you've got A Course in Miracles. You've got The Way of Mastery. There's so many different masters, guides that are teaching a path to who you really are. And
Mhm.
And that's what I think this time has been, the people not commuting as much and having more time to actually find each other and find these resources like you. This is what this whole time has blessed us with, when we look at it that way.
Yeah. And one of the things that was so powerful for me recently that I'd love to share, I learned from Chris Atwood and Janet Atwood. Janet is one of my dear friends and one of my mentors, but life happens, right? So before life happens, those things that make us feel contracted, come up with an emergency list or like an SOS lifeline of
Uh-huh.
the things that you're going to do to help you get out of that state of contraction. Because when you're in that state of contraction, you're normally not thinking and reacting clearly.
Oh, that's
So so in that SOS list, for me, for people, it could be different. So for me, it could be central channel breathing from Dr. Sue. It could be dancing. Maybe it's laughter yoga. Maybe it's going for a walk in nature. Maybe it's doing some PQ reps. I'm going through positive intelligence right now. But come up with a list that works for you. So in that moment of contraction, you can step back and change the course of how you're going to react. And the reason I say come up with this list in advance is because I know that when I'm in that state, and I'm not always reacting rationally.
right, right, right. Well, the idea also is that everything's got your back, and that way you
Mhm.
have something that you could count on. It's almost like, okay, I've done that. Now I don't won't need it. It's like taking an umbrella out when you think it might rain, and then it doesn't rain.
Yes, absolutely. But there are so many wonderful techniques. But spend this time really nurturing yourself.
It's perfect. Well, could you give us a little bit of? I've got the banner going along, and I want to make sure that people know about your book. It's called Perfect: A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and Transformation. And you guys, it's a great read. I really highly recommend it, and I think it'll be. You'll identify. I do. I identify a lot with your story, and so I think it'll help a lot of people on their journey to wholeness. And then that's it. You can reach that at judimiller.net. And then do you want to talk about your bonuses or about the free book?
Sure, sure. So as Kathy mentioned, you can buy the book at judimiller.net. So that's Judy with an I, but you can also buy it at Amazon or anywhere else you'd like. But I recommend you go back to my website so you can claim the 5 bonuses from some top transformational teachers that Kathy mentioned in the beginning: Marcy Shimoff, Janet Atwood, Dr. Sue Morter, Deborah Poneman. But Kathy, also for your listeners, no purchase necessary. On my website, I have a free ebook called Awaken the Creator Within: 8 Easy Ways to Open Your Heart and Live with Joy.
That's perfect, because that is, again, that could be on your SOS list. Actually, you could have your ebook on the SOS list of what to do. Breathe, read the book. Well, I think that the pause, the triggers are a gift, and if we can start to think of them as that, it's something wanting to come up to be cleared, and not rage or fear showing up again. Because if you don't clear it, it will show up again.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And try to take the perspective that life is a project, so we don't take things so personally.
Right? And life is perfect.
Yes, absolutely. Everything is here to serve us.
Right. So I hope everyone will take advantage of Judy's generosity and get her book, and then get the 5 free bonuses that are from some of my favorite teachers in the world, have been generous to add bonuses to this book, and then also go back to her website and get Awaken the Creator Within, because I think that these are real tools. This is not woo woo, even though I usually am. This is not woo woo. This is real practical tools that everyone can benefit from, because all of us are going to be um, this time of change, we have to let go of what we knew and look at the potential of what we can have and do and be the best that we can be, right?
Yeah, beautifully said, Kathy. Thank you.
Yes, and your tools are a great gift on the path to self-realization and self-love.
Yeah.
So thank you, Judi. Thank you so much. I want everyone to really take advantage of this amazing, generous offer, and I know you'll thank Judi and I later.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. It's been such an honor to be your guest.
Oh, yes. So again, go to judimiller.net. It's Judi Miller.net. And again, we'll see you soon. I put her information in the chat, but I'll put it in all the descriptions so that you'll be able to reach out to her, because I think you'll want to watch what she's doing now. She's got the formula, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy, so much.
Uh-huh. Bye-bye.